Hey everyone, back again for one more session with two amazing entrepreneurs. Today we'll be focused again on growth in the journey and key lessons. My name again is Salil Pitroda from Trinity Lane Capital. And so without further ado, let me introduce Artur and Robert. Fantastic. Thank you for joining, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Robert from CloudMinds and Artur from Fastly. We've got about 20 minutes. We'll try to walk through a number of topics. But just to level set and provide some context, it'd be great if each of you could take maybe 2 minutes, talk about yourself, talk about your company, just so the audience understands what you do. Robert, go ahead, please.
Great. Well, thank you, Salil. My name is Robert Zhang. I'm co-founder and president of a 3-year-old startup called CloudMinds. So imagine one day that when you go home, you have a robot nanny taking care of all your household chores.
You said robot nanny.
Yes, that's the word here. Rosie the robot. So basically, what CloudMinds is aiming to do is we enable and empower robots that could help families do useful things like household chores. Sounds like a very ambitious goal, but the company has been doing it for the past 3 years, and we're putting together all the key building blocks, ranging from the cloud AI infrastructure to the robot connector, as well as a network that connects the cloud AI with the robots. So we're all working very hard to help people to get robots to do very meaningful and useful things. So that's what we do on the high level.
Fantastic, thank you. Artur, tell us about Fastly.
So I'm Artur Bergman, founder and CEO of Fastly. We are 6.5 years old, and we are edge cloud, powering a lot of your favorite sites and applications that you use. So we have servers, about 50 locations around the world, and we allow our customers to essentially beat speed of light by having content and processing closer to devices, and also provide security, DDoS services for them. I'm engineer by training and founded it in 2011.
Great. We were talking at breakfast, and the companies are both so interesting, but both at very different points in their life cycle. Both very fascinating product-driven companies. Maybe, Robert, you could just start by telling us a little bit more about how you sequence the products, given what you guys do, and kind of where you are in the scalability curve and kind of that journey.
Sure. As you can all imagine that the robotics and AI industry has been booming for the past few years, but yet, if you look at the robots out there these days, they can only do limited things, right? So to have a robot to be able to help human and the families to do interesting things is actually a long journey. So CloudMinds, we've had a staged approach to tackle that problem, right? So we're not going to be able to, provide a service nanny robot tomorrow, but yet we are able to break the problem down into smaller components. If you look at the way that the robots currently work, mostly they're toys. You have a robot, we have a bunch of robots in the conference hall today, but they can only do simple things like, greet you or move their hands a little bit. But yet, if you want to have meaningful conversations or, shake hands or let the robot grasp certain objects, it's still very, very difficult. So from that perspective, we're trying to, break the whole problem down into a few components. One is the robot hardware itself. And then also, in order for the robot to be able to do useful things, you need to tap into the cloud AI, because you have almost unlimited amount of data, and also you can train your model on the cloud. And then you also need to have a global network to connect the cloud AI with the robots. So our approach is to look at these problems individually and start to work on these as a sort of a building block for the final goal of having a robot serving human beings. Right now, we're actually having products in all these 3 areas. And we believe, as we move forward, the market for robotics need is actually going to grow. And then, we want to also be ready from the product perspective so that, we believe it's only a matter of time for people to really use more and more of these robotic applications. So that's basically our high-level strategy.
That's great. And just to dig in on this a little bit, what happens when you're early to a market will be very promising? How do you put strategically the building blocks in place to know you'll be able to scale at the right time, but also manage all your resources?
Yeah, as a startup, we all have very limited resources. We can't put, our resources to do a lot of things. I think timing is very important, and also using the limited resources on the right things is also important. And especially for a goal that we're pursuing, which is actually going to take probably 5 to 10 years to accomplish, we need to be able to balance the strategic planning versus the near-term revenue generation opportunity, because our investors, our stakeholders, are not going to wait for 10 years for us to give them returns. So I think the way that we gauge the timing and the product rollout for the market that's already ready, right? So that's very, very important. So for the past couple of years, we've been working on products that we can launch that are already there are already market needs for those short-term product launches. I think it's important for us to to survive and to grow short-term while we're waiting for the long-term scalable opportunity to show up.
That's well said. Artur, switching gears, tell us about your journey. Help us dimensionalize where you guys are as a company, and tell us about the growth path.
So we've grown to about 420 employees. We reached over $100 million run rate last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And 1,600 customers. We do about 8 million requests per second right now, and we peak at about 5 terabits per second. So the first couple of years, we grew fairly slowly as we had a product market fit that worked well with Silicon Valley tech companies. So we grew pretty slowly for the first 3 years. We reached about 25 people, and then the last 4 years, we went from 25 to 100 to 200, 300, and 400. And so it just keeps on going. And then we also launched overseas. So we build data centers overseas first, but once we have them, going to the sequencing thing, we build the data centers for our existing customers. But once we have a good presence in, for example, Japan, from an infrastructure point of view, then we also start selling into those markets.
Mm-hmm. And Artur, what's been unexpected? What's been harder than you thought? What have some of the challenges been, and how have you handled them?
I think the thing you tell yourself when you do a startup is that you have all these tech problems and things you need to solve, but there is a fundamental problem that all enterprise startups have to solve, and that is go-to-market and how you sell and how you service your customers and how you make them trust you and how you deal with their legal environment, which is actually sometimes depressingly generic. And that was kind of the thing that I hadn't really seen or hadn't really thought of, and solved by very carefully deciding where we should just do what everyone else does and where we shouldn't, and then hiring the right people and empowering them to do that.
Okay, thank you. Robert, how about for you? What's been hard? What's been hard?
The fact that we're in a high growth space means opportunity, but also challenges. For example, talent, right? It's a very competitive market. For us to hire good people has been a constant challenge, because as a startup, we can't compete with the big guys with a lot of the fringe benefits, for example, or even the cash compensation. But we need to be creative to come up with ways of attracting talents, right? So we pitch them our long-term vision. We have very ambitious goals that could potentially change people's lives. So we need to get people to understand and buy in on that vision, right? But even with that, we feel that this whole robotics and AI talent market is getting very heated. For fresh graduates, you're going to have to pay them like a lot of money in order for them to consider to join you, right? And after they join you, how do you keep them motivated and to keep them, growing? It's also another challenge. So talent is one. The other thing is focus. We are a 3-year-old startup, and we're fortunate in the sense that we have, very well-known financial backers like SoftBank and a number of other institutional investors. But the problem with having a sizable investment is how do you focus on a number of things? Because there are a lot of very interesting projects that you can work on. But if you lose focus, then very quickly, you'll dilute the, sort of the long-term vision, right? So we've always been sort of adjusting our product focus and make sure that, the things that we work on stay, on the right path to our long-term goal. And sometimes it's not easy because, you need to make a decision as to, hey, this may not be immediately useful, but it may be serving our long-term goals, right? So there's a constant debate within the company's management team about, what are the priorities? How do we make sure that we do the things that we need to do versus, going after the red herrings and stuff like that.
No, that prioritization and focus is so important. Artur, let's talk operations and scalability. Tell me about what you managed to, what metrics you've put in place, and how you've scaled successfully to the level you have.
I think early on in the company, we managed by intuition, right? Like some of us knew very well what should be done. And a key point was we realized that if we don't measure it and attribute success correctly, we can't be in the room at all times to make sure that the intuition is there. And so the core metrics for us is really about customer satisfaction, retention, revenue growth, margin, and employee retention / happiness levels. Those are kind of the core strategic measurement areas that we have.
And tell us a little bit about your planning process and then sort of, the key things you look at to make sure the business is scaling well. And then let's also talk a little bit about the investors you have and how you kind of manage that dynamic.
Sure. So the faster you're growing, the further out you have to look to make sure that you're there at the right place at the right time. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's harder to look that far forward. And so we've had a quarterly business update review process that looks at these metrics and tries to project a year ahead for what the company needs. That's sometimes gone better, sometimes not as good as we wanted. But we have also spent time focusing on making sure that we evolve that process. And I think that's key because you're never going to get it perfect. You always need to reevaluate what you're doing at each stage of the company growth. So our investors, we've raised $180 million.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. The initial A and B round were led by August Capital. And then we also have Iconic as one of our bigger investors. So we kind of raised every 14 months. Mm-hmm. That's another thing with growth, right? Is the faster you grow, the more you have to raise, or so the earlier you have to raise, because you have a plan for how much you're going to deploy capital, and then things are going really well. But if you have, once you have $10 million of revenue a month, your balance sheet needs to be pretty big because it takes 30 days for people to pay. So you actually end up needing more cash on the balance sheet. So you need to raise faster and earlier, which is also something I don't think we had really expected.
Yes, little known secret, like fast growth can be challenging to manage, right?
All right, so
it's a good problem to have, but it's still a problem.
It is, and working with our banks and to make sure that we have the lines, and we invest CapEx. I'm very fortunate in that I really like all my investors and board members. I think that a mistake a lot of entrepreneurs do is not treat them as part of your company. And with that, I mean they shouldn't be in your business on an operational basis, but they should care about what happens. They should introduce you to customers. They should help you recruit when you ask them to. And you should have investors that you actually don't mind or even like having dinner with every couple of months. That makes your life much easier. I'm sure it makes their life much more fun and easier. And you have to build trust because they're part of that long-term team that will help you win.
That's absolutely right. It works both ways, but that's well said. Robert, tell us about, you have a unique set of stakeholders in the company. Tell us who they are, sort of some of their vision and objectives, and sort of how you manage the dynamic and sort of that partnership.
Sure. So starting from the early days, the company has only been in existence for 3 years. And starting from the early days, we had a good working relationship with SoftBank. And actually, Masayoshi Son himself. And as most of you guys know, SoftBank has been very active in the robotics and AI space, right? They acquired a lot of companies or invested in a lot of the companies in this space, ranging from Boston Dynamics and Brain Corp in San Diego, and quite a number of companies actually in the U.S. And we feel that this is very important because when you look for your investors, you want to have strategic alignment, right? Mm-hmm. Money is just one thing, but what other resources and strategic advice that these investors could help is actually more important than the money itself. And SoftBank has always been very supportive because they feel that we are actually a strategic a partner for their robotics ecosystem building. So we're fortunate in that sense. The other thing is, as you can see, we have a 5 to 10 year goal. And then, for us to accomplish that goal, we need a investor or investors who are patient. Because, we're not talking about getting the investor's ROI in the next 1 to 2, 3 years, right? From that perspective, it's important to understand, who your investors are, what their investment logic is, and therefore make sure there's no surprises along the way. Because, what if they say, hey, you're expected to generate $100 million revenue in the next, year, and then clearly we're not there yet. So I feel understand who your investors are, understand what their investment logic is, their strategy, and make sure that you're aligned as an entrepreneur. I think that's critical to the success of the relationship with the investors.
Fantastic. So just to wrap up, 20 seconds each, one takeaway on growth and scalability we haven't talked about.
Well, I think it's important to find the right space because it's so very important to ride on the right wave. And then the rest of it is execution. Because otherwise, if you're on the wrong track, no matter how hard you work, you're basically, working against, the trend.
The market's very important. Right. Artur?
Make a product that customers love and make them trust you and love you, and so that you're working well together. If your churn is 20% a year, growing, like doubling, becomes much harder than if your churn is 0 because you're reset much lower. And I think that is something enterprise customers tend to not do very well or at all.
That's right. Customers never lie. Well, on that note, thank you, Artur. Thank you, Robert. Congratulations on all of your success and the insights you've shared with the audience today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.